high. Since there are very few chipspeech users, there are even fewer comprehensive tutorials on how to tune it, so this is my attempt at one. But firstly, I just wanted to make it known that this is obviously not the only way to tune, and I am not trying to say that I'm the best or that my tuning is perfect. This is just how I like to do it. I've been using chipspeech consistently for over a year now, and I see a lot of my pet peeves with so many other chipspeech artists. And I know that's just because there aren't many people who talk about how to use this niche synth. But if there's something that you do and I say it's something I don't like, that's totally cool. Feel free to take or ignore any advice I give here. I'll be using various projects of mine to demonstrate some things. Anyways, the number one tip I have for tuning chipspeech is that it's not just slapping voices on a MIDI and calling it a day. That's definitely the easiest way, but if you want to majorly step up your game, you have to start looking at chipspeech as something more than just a MIDI instrument. MIDIs made for regular instruments will not match up perfectly with the chips, especially if you're using one made by somebody else, which is totally fine to do, but you'll have to make adjustments for it to line up properly. Something I didn't know for a very long time was that you can put small notes in between each one to make the voice sound more humanish, smoother, and overall just better. It's hard to describe in words, but here is how this sounds when I take away all the in-between notes. Compared to how it sounds when I add them back in. Personally, I think it sounds a lot better. The only way I could come up with to explain this is to think about it like an animation. The big, main notes are like keyframes. They define the most important parts of the song. But like an animation, when you add the in-betweens, it brings everything together and makes it smooth and refined. Hopefully that makes sense. Little notes make a big difference. Now, let's talk about the parameters within the actual chipspeech program. Firstly, X-sampa, which was something I didn't really understand for a while. X-sampa can be used to change how the voice pronounces a word if they say it weird or if you don't like how it sounds. Dandy tends to need a lot of pronunciation corrections. This song has a lot of weird words in it, so I had to use a lot of X-sampa to make his pronunciation sound like the original. Here's the original section of this song.
Just for the attention, 'cause that's just ridiculous. Sure is gonna get it. Here's the setting, fashion magazines line the walls now. The walls line the bullet holes.
Here's plain text from Dandy, without any X-sampa. Here it is with the corrections I made. Wikipedia has an X-sampa guide so you can find the sound you're looking for and change it for the chip in the X-sampa tab. It's really helpful with voices like Dandy, Rotten, or Spencer who just tend to say words weirdly sometimes. But it's good for any of them if you want to get extra detailed with pronunciation. It can be tedious to figure out what letters and symbols make what sounds if you don't have it memorized. But again, I think it's worth the effort. Wave rate and phoneme speed are another thing I used to overlook. Wave rate makes it more noticeable it's changed. It controls the actual speed at which each syllable is said, which can be very helpful when trying to do fast, wordy songs to ensure that your chip doesn't get behind the instrumental. I had to turn Dandy's wave rate super high for this cover because of how many fast syllables it has. Phoneme speed controls the length of the space between each syllable, which has a less noticeable effect on the overall speed. But if you're going to increase the wave rate, you might as well increase the phoneme speed as well because they go hand in hand. Now for the controls tab. Helium you rarely need to mess with. Slight changes can make the voices sound super weird, so only use it if what you're going for can't be done with the film factor alone, or with auto because the film factor has no effect on his voice. Please for the love of God lower the film factor for masculine voices. This is the #1 pet peeve that I see everywhere. Unless you're in super high ranges, for masculine voices the film factor should be below 30. 25 being the recommended percent. The default of 33 sounds so ridiculous. Versus when I put it at 25. I personally like to put Cider specifically at 27, it just sounds more fitting for him than 25 does. I like when you can hear the stupid smirk in his voice. Changing this seriously helps so much. I understand why this is such a common thing, because the default settings are assumed to be the best ones, but each of these voice banks vary a lot in how they should be tuned. Even in the chipspeech manual, Blig says that male voices should be set to 25, which kind of makes me wonder why it isn't the default considering that there are only 1.5 female voices, but it's whatever. Growl and breath are features that are pretty limited. Growl only works on Cider and Rotten, while breath only works for Bert, Dandy, and D, which is kind of disappointing. If you try using them on any other voices it doesn't change anything. The two parameters have similar effects, but Growl sounds more crunchy and aggressive while breath only increases the noise in the applicable voices, sometimes making it sound almost like a whisper. These are both very cool features, but they don't work well on every song. Here's a cover that I don't know if I love or finish, but I used a little bit of Growl on it. Gain and sizzle are two parameters that are very similar. Gain only has an effect on Bert and Dandy for some reason, but sizzle can be used to change how crunchy and robotic certain chips sound. It's handy with voice banks like Sam and Auto because you can turn the sizzle down to make them more understandable and less jarring. I usually don't have to mess with these too much, but it kind of depends on what kind of song you want to go for. For example, my variations on a cloud cover, which is a little bit older, but I turned down the sizzle on Sam's voice so he was more intelligible. But options completely change the sounding quality of the voice banks. They can be fun to play with if you're not quite happy with how the default sounds. They also have no effect on audio. Don't ask me why, I couldn't tell you. I personally don't stray from the default too often, but it's fun to experiment. Density is a feature that I think is super underrated. You can use it to make voices sound fuller or crunchier. It technically adds voices underneath the main one, but at lower percentages it just makes them sound generally cooler in my opinion. I've used at least a little bit in all of my recent covers. I always encourage experimenting with the density. The octave function can be used to make simple harmonies easier. You can just copy and paste a MIDI from the main voice and turn the octave up and down and you get a harmony. It makes it easier to experiment with how different ranges sound. In the modulation tab you are presented with two little wheels. Vibrato is the main one, but be careful with vibrato. It's good to have a little, but for some voices, more than a little starts to sound like talking through a fan. I would recommend using a little bit more than usual for songs that have a lot of long notes, but please use caution unless you want Andy to sound like he's about to have a nervous breakdown. Expression is supposed to add crescendos and decrescendos to notes. Apparently, I don't really know how it works exactly, but I just turn it up a little because I like to pretend I know what I'm doing. I don't notice much of a difference either way, except for Sam because the expression wheel completely changes the quality of Sam's voice. Pitch, glide, and humanity make small changes meant to make voice banks sound a little more human. Pitch adds random variation to the pitches of notes like that of a human singer, since, unlike synthesized voice instruments, humans are not always going to hit an exact pitch on every note. Glide changes how fast the voice changes notes and humanity changes what the glide sounds like, as in, changing the shape of the voice. Increasing it makes note changes sound more like a human singer. With these I mostly just set them to whatever my heart desires. I don't really notice any major changes with or without them, so I don't have any specific tips for using them. The mix tab I never mess with and I have no clue how it works, so go read the chipspeech user manual if you want to know what it does. I'll link it in the description. A lot of this video that doesn't come from personal experience comes from the manual, but nobody ever talks about it or knows it exists. Here are some various tips that didn't really fit anywhere else. When it comes to the film factor, Dandy is actually pretty lenient. I know I said to turn it down for the male voices, but if you're trying to use Dandy's high range it sounds better when you turn up the film factor some, but only for higher ranges. He also usually needs high wave rate increases because he tends to talk pretty slow and can sometimes have weird pauses between words. This is the same with Voter. With crunchier voices, like Vusam, Sam, Rotten, and especially Cider, you may notice that a small sizzle will linger between the last sound and the next line. To fix this, simply put a period between the words. Periods, like they do in writing, create a brief pause. Without this specification, the program thinks these lines are all part of one phrase, so it doesn't make any pauses on its own, which can lead to this weird lingering sizzle that can negatively affect the clarity of your tuning. this helped a little. I really love chipspeech and it makes me sad that people say it's confusing or too hard because it actually makes way more sense than the popular vsynth programs to me. So I hope making this tutorial will help it be more accessible and maybe teach newer users some neat tips. If there's anything I said that was really stupid and wrong, feel free to correct me or add anything I missed because I probably missed a lot. I just figured showing how I like to do things wouldn't cause any harm and might be useful for people just starting out. But, as I like to say, you can do whatever you want forever. Have a good day. Go make something cool.